Welcome to the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, March the 12th. My name is Pam, and let's begin with our first article. With Pandemic Relief Bill, Democrats expand the welfare state, by Krista Case Bryant and Noah Robertson. In Washington, as President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan speeds towards final passage this week, Democrats are hailing the bill as one of the most sweeping pieces of progressive legislation in decades. One they say will lift millions of Americans, particularly children, out of poverty, and could herald a deeper and more long-term shift in public attitudes towards government assistance. The bill allocates $92 billion, or about 5% of the overall price tag, towards public health initiatives, including testing, tracing, and vaccination, as the Monitor detailed last week. Nearly half of the bill's cost goes towards the third and largest round of stimulus payments to date, as well as expanding many existing government benefits, including the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, Medicaid coverage, and other subsidized health insurance. For an average family of four making less than $150,000 annually, that could amount to more than $10,000 in tax-free benefits, some of which will be paid out monthly. Lower income families could receive double that. It's one of the most important and transformational bills to come out of the Congress in the last quarter century, said Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, who chairs the House Democratic Caucus. He says he looks forward to supporting the bill, which meets the moment that we're in right now. Some are characterizing the legislation as the largest expansion of government welfare benefits since Lyndon B. Johnson or even Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Although its key steps would need to be renewed in order to endure, the bill arguably moves the country closer to a form of universal basic income. That's a concept that gained attention in 2020 primaries, when Democratic president candidate Andrew Yang promoted it as the most effective way to help struggling Americans, circumventing government inefficiency by allowing individuals to solve their needs in the best way they see fit, which in turn would funnel money back into the economy. It is unequivocally a landmark legislation in the sense of putting the biggest dent in U.S. poverty rates and child poverty in particular, really probably since the Great Society and maybe even since the New Deal era, says Samuel Hammond, Director of Poverty and Welfare Policy at the Niskanen Center, a think tank in Washington, D.C. In particular, he highlights the expanded child tax credit. It's really hard to overstate the anti-poverty impact of just that one piece in particular. Supporters argue this outpouring of government aid is exactly what's needed as Americans grapple with the twin challenges of a pandemic and an economic downturn caused by local, state, and federal shutdowns, which saw unemployment rise to nearly 15%. A blessing to many people who have been suffering. Some of us have been blessed, and as a result of being blessed, I sometimes think we don't realize how other people are suffering, said Representative Al Green of Texas, an assistant Democratic whip and member of the Financial Service Committee, whose constituents are also still grappling with the fallout of last month's winter storm. I've been blessed for one reason, to be a blessing to others, and I think that this bill is going to be a blessing to many people who have been suffering. Having passed the Senate on a 50-49 party line vote Saturday, the bill heads back to the House, which is expected to send it on to President Biden for his signature this week. The Senate version stripped out the House's $15 an hour minimum wage provision and also pared back weekly federal unemployment insurance payments from $400 to $300 per week, while phasing out stimulus payments at $160,000 annual household income rather than $200,000. Still, many Republicans are calling the bill excessively large and accusing Democrats of using the pandemic as political cover for advancing a liberal wish list at a time when the federal deficit just hit an all-time high of $3.1 trillion. I do think there are citizens in the United States who still need help, without question, says Representative Byron Donalds, a Florida Republican and House Budget Committee member whose mother ate sardines and made her own clothes to put him through private school. But we didn't start there, and then it got out of hand. It started out at hand. It started out of hand. I think it's important we understand that. It started way out of hand. Critics also questioned why, when there are now growing signs of recovery, this bill is almost as large as the $2.2 trillion CARES Act passed at the beginning of the pandemic. Approximately $1 trillion in Congress approved COVID-19 relief has yet to be disbursed. Meanwhile, unemployment has fallen to 6.2% as many states are reopening their economies, students are heading back to school, and new cases have declined rapidly. We should be opening up America and celebrating the end of this terrible scourge. Instead, we're battening down with irrational fear, said GOP Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky prior to the Senate's passage of the bill, while expressing concern about its impact on the national debt after the U.S. has already borrowed $4 trillion over the past year. This is a power grab in the sense that government will grow larger, and as government grows huge, it's hard to get government smaller ever. Every time the government has a huge explosion in growth, we never are able to pare it back. For social welfare expansions, the bill's four largest welfare expansions are all temporary unless renewed. Those include the expansions of the Child Tax Credit and Affordable Care Act subsidies for health insurance, the Child Care Tax Credit, and the Earned Income Tax Credit. Experts say the expanded benefit most likely to be renewed is the Child Tax Credit, which will increase from $2,000 to $3,000, with an additional $600 for those under 6 years old and made fully refundable. That means for those whose tax bill is lower than the amount of the benefit, they will receive not just a discount on their taxes, but a cash payout. House Appropriations Committee Chair Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut said in a statement that the changes to the Child Tax Credit, which were modeled on her previously proposed American Family Act, would cut child poverty nearly in half. This is a historic day, one that I've been working toward since 2003, she said after the Senate's passage of the bill on Saturday. By expanding and improving the child tax credit, this legislation forever changes the way that our nation supports both middle-class families and children in poverty. Republicans have supported extending greater government support to children, but some say it should be tied to work requirements to discourage parents from relying on government funding in lieu of employment. Some analysts say Democrats are overselling the likely impact of the bill. While it opens the doors to expanding America's welfare state, it's not on par with the creation of Social Security, Medicare, or the Affordable Cares Act, said Mark Goldwyn, Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Director at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. I don't think that the comparisons to the New Deal or the Great Society are apt. The main thing this bill does is COVID relief, says Mr. Goldwyn. He, along with others, argue it provides more aid overall than is necessary and is not as well targeted as it could have been. The risks of too much versus too little? This is something the country can't afford. You've just got like $1 trillion too much here, says Desmond Lockman, resident fellow and economist at the American Enterprise Institute. He sees the bill as politically motivated and worries it could cause the economy to overheat. If they were just interested in the economics, they would have never done something this big. Republicans have come under fire for not sounding alarm bells earlier on, with much of the conservative media more focused in recent days on issues like Dr. Seuss and cancel culture. Still, GOP Republican Tom Cole of Oklahoma notes that every single Republican can vote against the bill. It's not like pounding on the table and yelling louder would have made much difference, he said. Yet the bill's price tag and accelerated passage through Congress are indicative of how much the goalposts have moved since the Obama era, when the president faced significant pushback even from centrist Democrats for an $800 billion package during the Great Recession. As the GOP has taken a more populist turn, even Republicans have warmed up to the idea of sending families cash, with President Donald Trump pushing for a $2,000 stimulus check in December, just before he left office. As many Democrats see their inability to get more relief to taxpayers and reinvigorate the economy in 2009, as one of the reasons they lost big in the 2010 midterms. They feel like they made a mistake during the Great Recession by doing too little, says Mr. Goldwyn. This time, he adds, they would rather borrow $1 trillion too much. It seems like than $100 billion too little. Moving on. Exhausted. A year into pandemic, working moms see help on the horizon, by Laurent Belsey. The pandemic has produced a moment of clarity in the United States about a crisis that has been building for decades. The trade-offs many working mothers routinely face are becoming unsustainable as the lockdown reaches the end of their first year. Already stretched thin, balancing the demands of work, housework, and childcare, these women now face the extra demands posed by homebound children struggling to learn via online classes and the need to care for parents or family members who may require extra support during the pandemic. The silver lining is that working mothers' plight, a long-time problem, is finally coming to light. The Biden administration and Republicans in Congress are pushing rival legislation that would help families pay for child care, extend or increase unemployment benefits, and provide funding to fully reopen schools. Companies are re-examining their paid sick leave and flexible work policies. Business groups such as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable want to target federal funds for child care. There's been more interest from lawmakers in the last 6 months than in the last 20 years, says Sue Renner, executive director of the David and Laura Merage Foundation, which supports back office services to child care providers in 6 states. Advocates are optimistic that the attention will lead to action, in part because some companies have already made moves to be more mom-friendly, and because the interest in Congress is coming from both sides of the aisle. This is something where Democrats and Republicans can put behind some of the things they've been fighting over and focus on something American families need, says Betsy Stevenson, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. When the pandemic first hit and schools closed, politicians' first question was, how do we keep the airlines flying? There was just radio silence on what this whole thing means for our children. Now we're certainly having the conversation that we've needed to have for a very long time. The road to this potential policy moment has been anything but easy for families, and especially for mothers. The first word that comes to mind is exhaustion, says Alexa Balan, an academic coach and mother of 2 from Bend, Oregon. For Lori White, a single mom in Nashua, New Hampshire, the low point came last spring after she was furloughed from her teaching job and had to fight the bureaucracy for a month and a half before getting unemployment benefits. It's just one of those situations when you want to lean out the window and scream. Between February and April last year, 3.5 million adult women left the labor force, and despite a growing number of jobs, 2/3 of them have yet to return. That workforce erosion has been significantly greater for women than for men. An already fragile system. In fact, a smaller share of women are now working or looking for work than at any time since 1988, according to a new report from the National Women's Law Center in Washington. And the recovery has been slower for mothers. A new study from the National Bureau of Economic Research finds that if women with school-aged children had experienced a recovery similar to women without children, 700,000 more of them would now be part of the labor force. The reason for all this is that the pandemic's economic storm has battered the already fragile infrastructure that allowed women to work and care for children in the first place. For starters, the lockdown-induced recession decimated jobs. Previous downturns were hardest on goods-producing industries, where men predominate. But last spring's lockdown affected service industries the most, especially sectors where women predominate, such as leisure and hospitality. So many of those service jobs were the first to go, says Brent Orrell, a resident fellow at the right-leaning American Enterprise Institute. And they'll be among the last to really come back. And there's some question if they'll ever come back. Another piece of the working mom infrastructure hit hard by the pandemic is childcare. Last spring's lockdowns temporarily closed 1/3 of daycare centers, and by December, there were still 13% fewer open than a year earlier, according to a new report by Child Care Aware of America, an advocacy group. The challenge is that these operations, often poorly financed, are now struggling with higher disinfecting and other costs and lower attendance. Over half of those open are losing money, according to a December survey by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. 4 in 10 operations have taken on debt to make ends meet. The closing of schools also hurt working parents because suddenly a parent had to be home and supervising online learning. Most often, that burden fell to the mothers. When Miss Balan had some appointments with one of her children last year, she asked her husband to work from home and supervise the other child. He lasted a day, she recalls. He's wonderful and he's great, but he was just like, oh no, I can't do that again. I didn't have a choice. The younger the child, the more intensive the supervision had to be. Online preschool is a joke, said Lindsay Dillon, a mother of 2 in Norwood, Massachusetts, and senior marketing manager for a sustainability nonprofit. Children competed with each other to make the loudest noise over the computer or the silliest face, she said. It's not conducive to working from home. Unfortunately, I didn't have a choice. During the pandemic, everything got complicated. Miss Dillon gave birth to her second child, took maternity leave, came back to work just as her new daughter started daycare, and had to find a new preschool for her 3-year-old son because of behavioral issues. That was her low point. I know I'm lucky and I have to keep reminding myself that a lot of people have it far worse, she says. But you can't ignore the need for parents to have adequate child care. It's imperative to have that addressed in order to get the economy back up to where it was. The pandemic has been particularly hard on women of color. The racial implications of the economic downturn are really clear, says C. Nicole Mason, the first Black president and chief executive officer of the Institute for Women's Policy Research, a Washington think tank. I'm a single mother and have 11-year-old twins who just began middle school, and I work full-time. It's been really tough to manage virtual learning and a 40 to 50-hour work week, but I feel very fortunate. I didn't have to leave the workforce, but many other women did. Wide gaps by race and occupation. An estimated 22% of Black mothers left their jobs during the pandemic, closely followed by Asian mothers at 20% and Hispanic mothers at 19%, according to a survey of more than 1,500 mothers by the Mom Project's research arm, Work Labs. By comparison, only 12% of white mothers reported leaving the workforce. One reason for that gap is that Black and Hispanic women are more likely than their white counterparts to hold frontline jobs that can't be performed at home. They're also more likely to be single moms. Twice as many Black moms reported doing more than 90% of household work compared with white moms and Asian moms, the Work Labs survey found. The time away from work will mean lower lifetime earnings and potentially reduced opportunities for advancement for mothers. For Linda Overbay, a Seattle mother with 2 teens, it has meant a year delay in starting her new business. In January 2020, just as the first U.S. coronavirus case was confirmed in Washington state, she coincidentally gave notice at her physical therapy job to start out on her own. Soon after, concerns over the virus put a stop to that, and she became a non-working mom while her husband, an architect, worked from home. She had to increase her vigilance, she said. I was monitoring the website of the schools, news, communications from the schools and clubs. I was monitoring the workload of the kids. I definitely learned to monitor my own needs better. In the past, I might work myself to exhaustion and then look for support. After the pandemic hit, I left more space in my own workload and I allowed myself to decompress a lot more. She plans to open her business in the spring. New support on the way? In the nationwide search for solutions, reopening schools has taken on rising urgency for policymakers and citizens alike in recent months, although the trend towards hybrid or partial reopenings so far hasn't provided much of a fix. Childcare is one area where Democrats and Republicans both want to commit federal funds. This weekend, the House passed the Biden administration's $1.9 trillion rescue package, which includes $15 billion in block grants so states can help low-income families make child care payments. It also would expand the child tax credit and offer aid directly to child care providers. The bill's shape is being guided by Democrats, but some GOP senators have been seeking to put a focus on the issue. 10 of them have supported offering $20 billion for low income families with children up to age 12 to help pay child care expenses. Utah Senator Mitt Romney, a Republican, is proposing sending all but the richest families a monthly payment of $250 to $350 per child under 18, leaving parents to decide how to spend the money. Let people self manage this with some extra resources, says AEI's Mr. Orwell, whose own proposal would expand current programs that allow states to give monthly payments to the unemployed to help them train for new and better jobs. Maybe they have other needs that are not training, car repairs, transportation. Maybe they need child care. Others argue that affordable, high quality child care is a right that all families should have access to. Some of the lawmakers are looking at providing child care and the support to child care for only the poorest. And we say, wait a second. The majority of this country is middle class, says David Mirage, the founder of the Mirage Foundation. He urges a public private partnership that would make child care available to everyone. Corporations have a role to play, says Kristen Rowe Finkbeiner, chief executive of Moms Rising, a policy and activist group. Employers are changing their policies for working women, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the smart thing to do. Research shows it increases employee retention and makes it easier to recruit top female talent. Employers like Microsoft and Google have great policies, Ms. Rowe Finkbeiner says, but a lot of people don't work at Microsoft and Google. That's why she's pushing for more government support of child care. A new bill in Massachusetts, which would provide child care at the state level for families with less than half the median income, is garnering support from business groups. Paid sick leave is another top demand for working mothers advocates. The pandemic caused Congress last year to pass legislation mandating that even small companies offer paid sick leave for workers who were diagnosed with COVID-19, were caring for family members diagnosed with COVID-19, or were taking care of children whose child care was no longer available or whose school had closed. But the law had a sunset provision for the end of 2020. Some large companies like Levi Strauss have started offering paid sick leave. Other employers will need a nudge from federal legislation to begin offering it, says Ms. Mason of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. She's optimistic that Washington, having become aware of the crisis, will act. This is a moment unlike many others, she said. All engines are firing at 100%. There's a great momentum at the federal level. Our next article, titled, "In Zimbabwe, Female Laborers Don't Let Gender Roles Define Them." Women in Zimbabwe are refusing to be defined by gender roles as they make ends meet as truck drivers, mechanics, and workers in other male-dominated professions. But they are continuously reminded of traditional roles, and full equality and respect are still to come. By Farai Musaka. In Harare, Zimbabwe, there are very few female truck drivers in Zimbabwe, but Molly Manatees doesn't like to be singled out for her gender. "It has always been known as a male job, but don't say I am a female driver. We are just drivers. We do the same job," insists Miss Manatsi, a Zimbabwean truck driver whose income helps take care of relatives who have lost jobs due to COVID-19. From driving trucks and fixing cars to encouraging girls living with disabilities to find their places in society, women in Zimbabwe are refusing to be defined by their gender or circumstances, even as the pandemic hits them hardest and imposes extra burdens. As International Women's Day is marked around the world Monday, Zimbabwe's women celebrate the progress they have made in tackling discrimination in the workplace and acknowledge more effort is necessary. In many instances, Zimbabwean women have become leaders to help this troubled southern African country grapple with the double trauma of COVID-19 and ongoing economic deterioration. However, many women say it's not easy to achieve equality or professional recognition, and they are often reminded of women traditionally subservient roles in Zimbabwe. Once you get home, they expect you to cook, they expect you to wash clothes, all the housework work. You have to do it. That is a challenge. Miss Manatzi told the Associated Press as she prepared for a 1,056-mile trip to neighboring South Africa's port city of Durban. She is the only female driver at a trucking company that employs 80 drivers, she said. Memory Mukabeta runs a car repair shop, a vocation traditionally viewed as a male domain. Like Miss Manatzi, these days she is helping to support members of her extended family whose livelihoods have been hit by the restrictions caused by the virus. Some of them are male relatives. They no longer have jobs, so I take care of them, says Ms. Mukabeta, who said at times she's been forced to close her business by lockdown rules. After a devastating resurgence that saw an increase in numbers of COVID-19 infections and deaths in December and January, Zimbabwe's government is beginning to relax restrictions and businesses are trying to recover. However, it may be a longer road to recovery for businesses owned by women, especially in male-dominated sectors, due to inherent prejudice, says Ms. Mukabeta. From the moment she answers the phone, many clients doubt her abilities, she said. They expect a male to answer, she says. You have to convince them. They will be asking me so many questions they will doubt me, she said, as she stripped down an accident-damaged truck in need of repair. On paper, Zimbabwe has progressive laws that guarantee women's rights in the workplace and at home. The country is a signatory to international treaties supporting gender equality, but lack of implementation, as well as trained cultural practices that reinforce inequalities, mean women, who make up 52% of the population of 15 million, still lag behind in education, health, and work, according to the United Nations Children's Fund. UN Women projects that 8 million more women than men will be pushed into extreme poverty in sub-Saharan Africa in 2021 due to the pandemic. Although the pandemic has hit women the hardest, instead of whining, women are showing their grit, says Florence Mudzingwa, whose organization, Hope Resurrect Trust, equips girls living with a disability with skills, equipment, and confidence to make their way in the world despite their gender and disability. A digital marketer and life coach, Ms. Mudzingwa works from her wheelchair during the pandemic, saying all she needs is her computer tablet, reliable internet, and her brains. She's been using WhatsApp to encourage girls living with disabilities to sell items such as face masks to put food on the table for their families during the pandemic. They can relate to me. They say, if she is working, we can also work. This is not a time for self-pity. Being a woman and living with a disability should not turn us into charity cases, she said. Mr. Manatzi, the truck driver, that's a woman, Ms. Manatzi, the truck driver, said recognition, respect, and equality for women are unlikely to come on a silver platter in a highly patriarchal society such as Zimbabwe's, even though women continue to provide their mettle during the pandemic. We have to fight, says Ms. Manatzi. As we fight, we surely will come up with something, and one day they will recognize us, that we are not different. Well, my friends, that concludes the reading of the Christian Science Monitor for March the 12th. My name is Pam. Thank you for having me into your home today. Please stay safe until we meet here again. Be blessed and make it a great day.